Now, my assignment is to talk about whiteness. Good luck with that, yeah. Okay, a statement. Most white Americans would say, we are not racist. We are colorblind. We just see people, not race. Because racism is hating persons of color, treating them as less than human. Now, I want to challenge all of those statements, but I'm going to challenge those statements by using my own story a little bit. And about 13, 14 years ago, I did an ethnography. I grew up in a white Presbyterian church, okay, my whole life. And I decided to do an ethnographic study of an interracial church. And I remember going to church that day, and I'm going to read just a couple of sentences. Feminist, race-conscious, progressive wannabe, I am especially zealous to investigate a community that might have liberatory lessons for secular society. I think I have found it in this multiracial community of, and this is a fake name, Good Samaritan United Methodist Church, et cetera, it became multiracial. As I walk into the church, however, I walk in and I'm expecting a mixed race group, but I'm surprised at my own response to all the dark skin in the room. A black woman approaches me, extends her hand with a bulletin, introduces herself, and welcomes me warmly. But I find myself aware of the paleness of my skin as I respond, trying to hide any signs that I am not used to worshiping with more than a few token black people. The overeager sound of my voice tells me I am probably failing. Now, I could go on. A good 3/4 of the people gathering to worship are black or ebony, dark tan, bronze, and shades of color for which I have no names. Now, this is the least embarrassing mistake I made in this community, but it changed me. And it also challenged and forced me to look at categories like my belief that racism was this malicious hating of persons of color, and that I'm a nice white Christian woman, so of course I am. But then I discover there are other modes of experience that contribute and constitute racism, and I just want to give you a few of those. There's been a change in the scientific understanding of prejudice. We now know that the operation of prejudice and stereotyping in social judgment does not require personal animus, hostility, or even awareness. In fact, prejudice is often implicit. That is, unwitting, unintentional, and uncontrollable, even among well-intentioned people like me, and it is widespread and ubiquitous. Now, I'm quoting people, I won't give you all the names, but these are people who do studies. So implicit prejudice operates unintentionally, outside of our awareness, is empirically distinct from explicit prejudice, which of course is what I assumed all prejudice was, and it uniquely predicts, however, social judgments and behaviors. Now, another official definition for aversive racism is research shows most whites who express egalitarian values, non-prejudiced attitudes, also because of basic principles associated with categorization that promote bias, harbor unconscious negative feelings and beliefs about African Americans. Now, some of this has already been said, comes from media stereotypes. Even though most white Americans indicate they are not prejudiced on self-report measures, the majority of white Americans possess these unconscious racial biases. Now, some of the obvious examples of this would be the assumptions about black boys who are perceived to be dangerous in ways that white boys would not be, and we know about some of the gun issues with that. So here are just a few sort of concluding categories that I had to develop. I mean, I didn't make these categories up. I mean, I had to go and discover these categories to begin to get at this disconnect between what has been called a habituation. A habituation. Racism is a kind of habituation. Now, habituations are the pre-reflective, non-intentional ways in which we grow up and learn how to do things. I mean, some habituations are like skills, like playing tennis is a habituation. You don't have to stop and think, now I do this with my arm or this with my racket. If you do that, you'll miss the ball. It has to be, it's a learned bodily skill. Habituations, when we factor in things like racialization, become ways you are embodied or grow up, the bodies you're used to being with, the bodies you're used to thinking are, normal people, and the bodies you grow up. Now, hopefully that's changing in our younger culture. But when we have predominantly white churches, predominantly white neighborhoods, bodily habituations can emerge, they can be altered, but that's why I think my example of walking into the church thinking I'm going to be this welcoming, liberal white woman, and then being, one of the few white people in the room, I felt uncomfortable. That's embarrassing. I'm, telling you an embarrassing story, but it's not just about me, it's wider. Another term besides, have I gone too long? Oh, okay. I know, blah, 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 blah. Is the notion that blackness is a race and being white is just being normal. I mean, I don't have a race. Race is an attribute of other groups. But that's the notion that goes with white privilege, and it's been called a number of different things. But it is the ability to presume that your reality is the reality, that your experiences, if white, are universal and not particular to your racial identity. It's the ability to assume that you belong and others that will presume you do too. You walk into a store, nobody's going to stop you, et cetera, et cetera. The ability to define realities for others and expect that definition to stick because you have the power to ensure that it becomes the dominant narrative. And it's the ability to ignore any evidence to the contrary. There's no such thing as white culture. That's just the way reality is. There's black culture, right? There's Native American culture, but, white isn't a descriptor. Now, I'm criticizing this. I'm just saying that this is a set of assumptions. The conclusion can be, and frequently is, that colorblindness is, in fact, not a welcoming posture. It's not meaning, oh, come and join us, anybody. Colorblindness is an avoidance of these realities and the structures, as well as the well-meaning intentions of people like me. It's just not just intentions that are well-meaning but don't actually get lived out. It's also structures that I don't have time to talk about. But it's, in other words, we need to resist colorblindness because that means we're denying our whiteness, our privilege, our social location, and we're avoiding dealing with the realities that shape many other lives in ways that I have not been aware of in the past. So, community change, relational change, facing our own whiteness, and memory recovery. I'll just close by saying we have this wonderful group in Durham called the Pauli Murray Project, which is about using the story of an African-American woman who grew up in Durham to get us in the community, the church I go to all share our own histories of discovering when did we first find out about race and being one of two white people in this larger group, the other people in the group learned about race long before I did. So I want that kind of thing to change, and the church is a place that has the possibilities for that. So.
I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be here with such wonderful colleagues. I am shocked and appalled that they have stayed under their time limit, which is like a first in history. And a bit embarrassed that that I may, yes, that I may hit the mark and be alone tonight. In that, so, but grateful to be here. Grateful to the bishop and to Pastor Rodriguez for their kind hospitality in inviting us to address you on this night. So I've been charged with speaking to you briefly on the subject of Black women's roles in this, as Dr. Carter has already pointed out, this contemporary moment of a long-suffering movement for Black freedom in America. And I am grateful for the opportunity to do so precisely because I agree with the significant observations of Black feminist theorist Gloria Hull, who noted that all too often all the women are white and all the Blacks are men. But what about Black women? Is the question that drives me as a womanist theoethicist. What about those of us who are daily subjected to the death-dealing and intersecting schemes of racism and sexism in church, academy, and society? And to this, Gloria Hull responds, but some of us are brave. Reverend Brady asked me to talk about Black women tonight, and any conversation concerned with Black women's resistance must begin by acknowledging what may appear to be obvious, but is barely recognized as such. And that is that Black women are both Black and women, all at the same time, every day. And as such, enfleshed as such, right, Black women typically experience racial oppression on the one hand and gender oppression on the other hand in ways that are distinct from those who are situated as one or the other, right? Either Black, right, or woman. Black women's experience, that is, of inequity is compounded in ways that are often foreign to the monovocality of the experiences of Black men and white women. And it's out of this experience, right, of being both Black and woman every day at the same time, that womanism, right, is born as a theological discourse. And is the discourse in which I center myself and think and reflect theologically about the church and about our witness as those who call ourselves followers of Christ. It's significant to note, as Dr. Carter has noted already, that although theological and theoethical claims first emerge, Black women's theological and theoethical claims first emerge as a systematized discourse in the 1980s, womanism is actually rooted in a tradition. It's a traditional culture of Black women's resistance, Black women's survival, and Black women's celebration, which history tells us did not just begin ex nihilo in the 1980s, right? Womanist theological inquiry would argue that the courage to resist racial and gender and class-based oppressions generally emerge from Black women's faith in God, who is the parent of all, recognized as such, and thus enlivens the kinship of all people. In other words, Black women's faith has shaped their praxis. It is faith that has shaped Black women's action in the world and the confluence of Black women's belief and action has served as the primary model of resistance that has been passed down to generations of African American women. Now, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with this sort of resistance to race, gender, and class oppression in America, I'd like to offer a few examples of Black activist women of faith from across the centuries who are not only concerned about racial justice, but also concerned about gender justice, especially as it relates to women of color, more specifically Black women. For example, Jarena Lee, born in 1783, there is no record of her death, a Black preacher, the first woman given a license to preach in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Ida B. Wells Barnett, born in 1862, a churchwoman noted for her anti-lynching campaign, recorded in her classic Southern Horrors and The Red Record. She was a devout churchwoman who actually eventually would leave the church because the pastors there, male of course, would not support her work to end what I have identified as white terrorism in the form of lynching, and in fact ordered her to be silent. Anna Julia Cooper, born in 1858, an educator, the fourth African American woman ever to earn a PhD. Of course, it was not earned in the United States of America, but at the University of Paris-Sorbonne. She was an Episcopal church woman, educated in schools designed to train men for ministry. Harriet Jacobs, born 1813, an African American writer who wrote her famous Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl under the pen name Linda Brent, a devout churchwoman who believed that God would rescue her from slavery when she was threatened with imminent rape by her white owner. She hid in an attic for 7 years to prevent her sexual exploitation. Her post-emancipation work was dedicated to the uplift of Black people, especially Black women. Zora Neale Hurston, born 1891, a towering figure of the Harlem Renaissance, one of the only women to be acknowledged, although marginally, as a member of the Harlem Literati. An anthropologist and folklorist focused on telling and retelling the stories of the experiences of Black women in America. Pauli Murray, the Reverend Dr. Anna Pauline Murray, born 1910, a lawyer, a civil rights and women's rights activist, the first woman ordained in the Episcopal Church. All of these women, among many more, lived out their faith commitments by, as I mentioned earlier, rebelling against patriarchy and white racism, which is in a sense the scandal of Black womanhood, the scandal of Black womanhood that is able to call everyone's bluff. For the norm would suggest that one can be anti-racist but patriarchal. The norm would suggest that one could be anti-patriarchal but racist. But Black women say, You can't be pro-Black on the one hand and sexist on the other. That's not justice. Right? Justice is not being anti-sexist on the one hand and racist on the other. Black women assert that oppressions are interconnected. If you are a racist, chances are you are a sexist too. And if you are racist and sexist, chances are you are classist too. And if you are racist and sexist and classist, chances are you're heterosexist too. we are heterosexist too. Why? How can we say this? Because as Black women's experience tells them every day, oppressions are interconnected. And the Womanist Theological Project carefully attend to the compounding of social oppressions in the lives of Black women and those whom they love. So this rich tradition of Black women's Christian resistance notwithstanding, the reality is that male lives, male bodies have historically been valued more than women's lives and women's bodies. And yet what is so interesting about this present moment is that we find Black women now, as then, but now, as the progenitors, the mobilizers, and the sustainers of this contemporary movement for Black freedom or against anti-Black racism. And this was the case in the civil rights movement of the 20th century. And as the historical record indicates, in the movement for Black freedom in the 18th and 19th century America. Women today, like Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, created the hashtag Black Lives Matter. Black women. They created the hashtag that has gone viral as a political intervention in a social context where Black life is consistently profiled and targeted. Young Black women like Sinead Nichols and Umara Elliott, who organized the Million March New York City in response to Darren Wilson's non-indictment. Black women like Ashley Yates and Alexis Templeton and Brittany Farrell, who founded Millennial Activists United in Ferguson, Missouri, after the shooting death of Michael Brown. Black women like Carmen Perez, executive director of the Gathering for Justice, who organized the die-in at Brooklyn's Barclays Center on the night when Kate and William went to see the Brooklyn Nets play. It was the most successful, the highest profile action of the movement to date. These Black women, they are our Ida B. Wells. They are our Fannie Lou Hamers, our Septima Poinsett Clarks, our Assata Shakurs, our Joanne Gibson Robinsons, our Claudette Colvins, our Ella Bakers, our Mahalia Jacksons, who, when King was failing on the Lincoln Memorial, whispered to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." But because their bodies sit at the intersection of racialized subjugation on the one hand and gendered subjugation on the other, the confluence of which, race and gender coming together, the confluence of which sanctions Black women's class caste subjugation and inherently leads to their sexual subordination, which means that Black women are quadrilaterally jeopardized, that is, potentially 4 times jeopardized by the moral, or shall I say immoral, scapes of the arbiters of the status quo. Because Black women are enfleshed as such, their experiences and distinct contributions are not only marginalized, caricatured, but even more insidiously are rendered fictitious, as if Black women, as their own epistemic center, self-negate. That is, as if Black women do not know that their own story is true. I dare say, since we are in the church, these are they which have come through the great tribulation. These are they whose robes have been washed in the blood of the Lamb. And we know that their own blood, their own sweat, their own tears, and the blood, sweat, and tears of their children drenches the streets of Ferguson. It drenches the streets of Staten Island, where one is asphyxiated in the 21st century with a human noose. It drenches the streets of Cleveland and Los Angeles and Sanford, Florida. Unless we think too highly of ourselves than we ought to, it drenches the streets of Durham and Raleigh and Greensboro and Charlotte and Fayetteville and Winston-Salem and every village and hamlet, nook and cranny in between as the result of Black social crucifixion. That blood cries out with Christ now. So let's be clear, and I'm about to finish. Some might default to a normative gaze which would suggest that the primary reason which motivates Black women toward their leadership and participation in this movement is because of their sons and their brothers and their husbands and fathers are the ones being killed, which is absolutely true. But to privilege this reality over the fact that Black women are, for instance, incarcerated 3 times more than white women, that Black women themselves are being killed at disproportionate and alarming rates alongside Black men and Black children at the whim and fancy of anti-Black racism, which begets anti-Black violence, is to be seriously mistaken. Don't be confused. For as much as Trayvon Martin's life did not matter, as Dr. Carter might say, for as much as Jordan Davis's life did not matter, for as much as Michael Brown's life did not matter, for as much as Akai Gurley's life did not matter, for as much as Tamir Rice's life did not matter, for as much as the lives of these Black men and Black boys did not matter, as they were shot down like dogs in the street. Interestingly enough, much like the man who was shot down like a dog on a Memphis balcony that we celebrated last week. For as much as these boys and young men's lives did not matter, neither did the life of Rekia Boyd. Yvette Smith's life did not matter. Renisha McBride's life did not matter, and neither did the life of 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley Jones. It's in the face of this sort of communal devastation that womanist theological and theoethical analysis, which is born from the resistance traditions of women of Black African descent in America, vigorously fights, that's right, vigorously fights for the wellness and the wholeness of an entire community. It fights by boldly asserting Black lives matter, all of them, male, female, and non-conforming, poor, working, and rich, dark-skinned, brown-skinned, and light-skinned, professor, bus driver, and CEO, queer, straight, L, G, B, and T. Black lives matter, all of them. And to suggest otherwise, to perhaps suggest that Black men's lives matter as a function of patriarchy or misogyny, or to suggest that, even better, all lives matter as a function of post-racial racism, which dismisses the fact that all lives are not threatened by state-sanctioned, academy-sanctioned, and ecclesial-sanctioned violence. Evidenced in the fact, for example, that a 12-year-old Black boy can be shot dead on sight while playing in the park with a toy gun, while a white man, adult, shoots 2 state troopers in the head with high-powered weaponry, hides out in the forest of Pennsylvania for 6 weeks with an arsenal of weapons and tactical equipment, causes an entire city to be locked down for weeks, and is taken alive to have his day in court. In light of these kinds of realities, to suggest that all lives matter due to an underlying post-racial negrophobia that resists the affirmation of Black life by any means necessary, is to, in fact, participate by way of Afrophobic benevolence in anti-Black violence, of the sort that rationalizes and vindicates the unjustifiable slaying of Black people who, for example, walk while black, drive while black, play while black, sleep while black, go to the store while black, walk downstairs while black, visit friends while black, teach while black, who go to school, as recent headlines have indicated, at Yale or Harvard or any other number of our institutions while black, who preach while black and woman. To dilute the opacity of Black Lives Matter by defaulting to All Lives Matter plunders the intellectual property of black women who already testified Black Lives Matter. It further dismisses the historical reality that tells us, as Alicia Garza has already pointed out in her beautifully crafted essay, A Her Story, of the Black Lives Matters movement, that when black people, male and female, because remember, contrary to normative vocality of womanhood, all the women are not white, and contrary to popular racial imagination, all the blacks are not men. But the Her Story of freedom movements in the US tell us that when black people get free, all people get free. The fact is that most of us are not brave. Too many of us are running scared. Thank you.
Can anybody say mic drop? Hey, thank you, Dr. Turman. Thank you all to our panelists. And tonight we have billed this event not only a listening event, but an event of conversation, and that of a sacred conversation. And so we invite you now into a time of that conversation. And we're going to have a time when you can have conversations where you sit. We've had such an outpouring of support, and our audience has grown so much more than we expected. We had to move into this beautiful sanctuary and are not around tables as we first envisioned this. So the logistics may be a little awkward, but we ask you to bear with us. We're going to take some time now, and if you'll gather just where you are in groups of maybe 5 or 6, as best you can, contemplate what you have heard, what you brought into this space tonight, what's on your mind, your concerns, and try to come up with one question. I know it's hard, one question, and try to direct it to one person on our panel so we can try to get through as many of your questions. We certainly will not get through them all. We're going to try to go till about 8:30, so we'll do as much as we can. And then we have a charge at the end, because what we don't want as we design this activity tonight is for it to stop here, for this to be the only conversation, because it's great to come together and talk and then go home and forget about it. That's not what we want to do. We want to have more conversations, and some of you have signed up, and you will have more opportunity to sign up if you want to be involved in other conversations, possibly be trained to lead your own conversations in your own local communities. That is what we hope one thing is coming out of this evening. So let's take a few minutes and converse about what you heard, what you brought, come up with one question. We'll come back to order, and then I'll just do my best to recognize you so you can ask your question and try to direct it to one of the panelists if you would. Please, converse.